Mr. Speaker, because the issue of Sondu is an issue that has been there with us for the longest time. Maybe people are not familiar with this issue, Mr. Speaker. It's an issue that is associated between two issues of conflict areas. Mr. Speaker, one is the issue of periodic attacks by the Kipsigis community on the Luo community on the issues of cattle. But the more overarching issue, Mr. Speaker, has been the issue of the contested border points between these two communities. We know very well that, Mr. Speaker, during the time of the regime of the late President Moi, this issue escalated very fast to a serious tribal clash that first started by the attack on the Luo communities and then escalated to the point whereby retaliations led to the killing of the other community, Mr. Speaker. During the time of President Kibaki, as well as during the time of President Uhuru Kenyatta, we saw a bit of calm among these two communities. But this part of new attacks on the Luo communities at the border, Mr. Speaker, has emanated in the wage of what was called maandamano. I remember that on 7th of July this year, there was an attack that was perpetrated on the Luo community by the people that come from the other side of the border that is contested in Kericho. And, Mr. Speaker, many of the Luo communities, out of the 8 people who died, all of them happen to be the Luo community. I am a national leader, Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to tribalize this just because I happen to come from that area. It is indeed wrong to tribalize this kind of conflict because that kind of ethnic wrangle can end up bringing down a nation. But, Mr. Speaker, I must say that the kind of silence that we have seen in the presidency on the issue of Sondu is wanting. I say wanting because the president of this country has appointed a cabinet secretary who is supposed to deal with issues of this magnitude. Mr. Speaker, when the cabinet secretary who is in charge of interior and security went to Sondu, Mr. Speaker, he did not take time to sit down with the leaders on that area and deal with the overarching issues of these tribal killings. Instead, the cabinet secretary, Mr. Speaker, ended up just sitting with the police administration. And this happened knowing very well that when the clashes started, the police were supporting members of the other communities to facilitate this kind of crimes, Mr. Speaker. They were on TV and we saw this, Mr. Speaker.
What is your point of order, Majority Whip?
Mr. Speaker, sir, I want, under Standing Order number 105, to appeal to my colleague, even if he has grounds for substantiation. Let this motion, Mr. Speaker, bring us together. This motion, Mr. Speaker, contribute towards peace. But, Mr. Speaker, when we use this floor to then state categorically that the police is aiding one tribe against the other one, we are not rising to the level of this House. I do not think that any police commander has the capacity to see two youths and say these ones are Luos and these ones are Kalenjins. It's the wrong way to go. I appeal to my brother, that is not the route. Otherwise, tomorrow we shall count more bodies, I tell you.
Senator Eddy, can you correct your statement if that is what you had said?
Mr. Speaker, I've given you the statistics that are in the national domain. Of the, if there are clashes anywhere, and 8 people have died, and there happen to be random clashes, and out of those 8 happen to be a member of one community, why must I not mention that? Honorable Boni Aluale As we speak right now, the formal border, as formal as is in government, of these two conflicting communities
Senator
is
Eti,
right.
You will address the Speaker, not Boni Kalwale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to inform my brother, Honorable Boni Kalwale, that the border of the two warring communities is right at behind Olo Primary in Nyakach. And that is about 1 kilometer away from the Kisii-Ahero Tarmac Road. As we speak right now, the police are at the Tarmac Road. They are not at the border where the clashes are happening. What is that supposed to mean? It means that it aids one community against the other. And one of the prayers that I wanted to invite us as a Senate to do, very, very honestly, is to make sure that the police infrastructure in that border region is changed completely, so that we can have new officers and new authority that can be able to deal with this issue without any bias, so that these communities can be at par. But what I was also alluding to is that the president must make a pronouncement on this issue. The reason is, if the CS went there a few months ago and was not able to resolve these issues, and the president does not pronounce himself on this matter, Mr. Speaker, the president comes from a community that is in power today, and the other community is perceived to come from the opposition, Mr. Speaker. If we don't deal with that issue in a way that the president does not pronounce himself in this matter, then this issue gets politicized, and then it escalates to the levels that Honorable
Give him 1 minute to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, just 1 minute to conclude. I think that, Mr. Speaker, I'm just trying to prescribe solutions here, that if the president pronounces himself on this issue as a matter of national security, it will be weightier, and it will be taken seriously by local leaders, so that they can sit down and talk. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, if the president cannot pronounce himself on this matter, then I want to plead with this House that because we're national leaders, then perhaps we need to form an ad hoc committee to go and investigate these issues, try and bring the communities together, and I will urge the senior leader, the majority whip, because the majority leader is not in the House, that perhaps help us come with this other committee, so we can go to these communities, sit down with them, form an equivalent of Gacaca courts, and then be able to talk with them to bring this matter to rest. Otherwise, we might lose a nation by having two communities pitted against each other, where one comes from the president's side and one comes from the leader who is purported to be the leader of opposition. With that, Mr. Speaker, I want to support this motion, and I want to invite sobriety as we deal with this issue, that it should not be tribal, but we find lasting solution without any bias. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.